and together with our witnesses for a continuation of our study on the situation of women. We have today two witnesses from Geneva by video conference. We have Sarah Hussain. Ms. Hussain practices constitutional, public interest, and family law at the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. She serves pro bono of the Bangladesh Legal Aid and Services Trust, which is called BLAST, and that is a trust that works to make the legal system in Bangladesh more accessible to poor and marginalized people. She is also an honorary executive director of the Legal Aid Services, and was the recipient of the 2016 International Women of Courage Award, awarded by the United States Secretary of State, among a number of other things that you'll see in her bio. We will start with her, but before that, I will introduce our witness who is here with us today, Asia Nasser, who is a Pakistani politician, parliamentarian affiliated with the political party Jamiat Ulema Islam, and she's been a member of the National Assembly of Pakistan from 2002 to May 2018. And she has opposed a ban on consumption of alcohol by non-Muslim Pakistanis, and also protested the ban on non-Muslims being elected Prime Minister or President of Pakistan. And her CV has also been submitted to the members of the committee. I want to welcome both of the witnesses, and recalling that the purpose of our study, of course, is to find out what the different impact and issues that are faced by women human rights defenders around the world. So we will begin with the video conference. We will begin with Ms. Hussain. Can you hear us, Ms. Hussain?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. We'll begin with you for 10 minutes with your testimony.
Great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. And thank you very much for the opportunity to provide a statement to you in connection with your study on women's human rights defenders, which is sorely needed, I think, at this point. My statement is based on my experiences with the Bangladesh Legal Aid and Services Trust, and I'll try and focus on the risks faced by women human rights defenders in the course of seeking or trying to secure for others access to justice, and how they are affected, particularly in relation to the intersections with ethnicity, sexuality, language, and disability, amongst others. As you've heard, I'm a lawyer in private practice, and I serve pro bono with BLAST. I won't speak about my personal circumstances now, but really just about our experiences, and the experiences both of colleagues and of clients who are women human rights defenders. But just before I discuss our key concerns, let me speak for a moment about our work in BLAST. We're an unusual organization. We were set up following a resolution of the Bangladesh Bar Council, the professional regulatory body, as part of its commitment to providing legal aid for the indigent and legal aid for those from marginalized communities. We were set up at a time when Bangladesh was emerging from military rule into a period of elected government. We work right now, after 25 years, across all 64 districts of the country, and we are locally managed by the Bar Association in each district. We have about 500 staff and about 2,500 panel lawyers, a pro bono lawyers network, and we now work increasingly with community organizations and with universities through legal clinics and community law clinics. Our legal services involve community awareness programs on rights, remedies, and services, individual litigation, primarily on family law, but also land, labor, and criminal defense, and constitutional rights litigation. And we also do strategic litigation around discriminatory or arbitrary laws, policies, and actions. We've been deeply involved in condemning impunity for violence against women, in particular issues of child marriage, domestic violence, and rape. We've taken up cases of violence against women and girls from marginalized communities, and some of our landmark equality litigation includes cases challenging so-called fatwa violence, forced veiling, discrimination by the police in recording rape complaints by women from indigenous communities, and the recent prohibition of the so-called two-finger test, a medical legal procedure, as well as challenges to disability-based discrimination in public employment. So from our perspective, women human rights defenders include women working on many rights and for many communities. This includes on civil and political rights, for example, alleged disappearances or extrajudicial killings or torture of family members, as well as freedom of expression and association, particularly for labor rights activists, economic and social rights around rights to housing, resisting forced evictions, right to education and health, and also women working with different communities, whether indigenous people, sexual minorities, people with disabilities, or Dalits. I'd like to start just by setting out a couple of emblematic cases which I hope will illustrate our key concerns regarding the situation faced by women human rights defenders. One of these cases, that of Kalpana Chakma, is from the Chittagong Hill Tracts, an area in the southeast of Bangladesh which until recently was predominantly inhabited by indigenous peoples. Kalpana was a woman human rights defender, a leader of the Hill Women's Federation and a well-known advocate in women's rights. She was allegedly abducted from her home in 1996. Now, more than 20 years later, the case still remains under investigation. The third investigation has begun and sees no sign of ending. And it is a clear, demonstrable example of total impunity in a particularly egregious case. And it's had a very chilling effect on women activists in that region, as well as across the country. There's also the case of Rizwana Hassan, a fellow lawyer of mine and the leader of the Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Association, who's conducted landmark litigation herself around environmental rights and justice. A few years ago, Rizwana faced a situation where her husband was abducted and was found only recovered after she had made public appeals, including to the Prime Minister, for his recovery. Again, a case which has sent chills through the spine of many of us. Let me cut to a more recent case, and one not of a very high-profile person like Kalpana or Rizwana, but of an everyday, ordinary school teacher. A young woman, a school teacher in a remote district town, became a client of ours last year. When she was 6 months pregnant, she was arrested at about 1 a.m. from her home while sleeping with her husband and 5-year-old son. The police claimed that she'd made a Facebook post in support of the then school students' movement on road safety. She was held overnight in a police station and for several weeks in a local jail where there were no hospital facilities available for women. She was refused bail by the trial court and then by the appeal court, and ultimately we only got bail for her in the High Court after we were able to show her medical certificate showing the extent of her pregnancy and where no counterclaim could be made from the Attorney General's office, even though they were trying to resist her release from prison at that point. Let me tell you about a few cases of everyday threats and everyday risks that are faced by women human rights defenders. As I said, we consider not only lawyers, but others to be human rights defenders, anyone standing up for the protection and promotion of human rights. For us, our frontline colleagues, our paralegals, face particular risks. Particularly those who work in urban informal settlements in low-income communities, have spoken about many situations, often daily situations, where community leaders, particularly those who are elderly and influential, threaten them and try to stop them from providing support to women and children who are survivors of violence. In one case, for example, involving sexual violence against a child, one of our women paralegals was trying to stand by that child and her family in the situation. She found herself encircled inside this dense informal settlement, and afraid that she might be hurt physically, she had to retreat and couldn't in the end pursue the case at all. We also find from women paralegals that they face many threats that are simply not even considered to be relevant by their male counterparts. So, for example, they can't work in these areas after dusk. There's too much of a risk of physical assault. They also face, even in broad daylight, continuous commentary about themselves, about their clothing, their appearance, about just the fact that they're going into homes, and they're often accused of breaking up families or trying to disrupt the peace. They're often accused of why they don't have families themselves, or interrogated about their own personal situations, whether they're married, if they're not married, why they're not married, how many children they have, and so on, and generally made to feel that their marital status is more relevant than their capacities and abilities to work. Many also face cyber threats. Now, both men and women face this, but women particularly face cyber threats, again, in relation to their sexuality, their behavior, and their dress. In the case of human rights defenders who are transgendered and from the Hijra community, we have colleagues who work around trying to espouse and promote the rights of the Hijra community, given recent high-level government recognition of the community. They face particular threats, threefold threats. First, threats from other Hijra groups with whom they may have rivalries. Secondly, from leaders of the Hijra community. And thirdly, from the police, who often don't accept or are willing to take in their complaints if they go to police stations to register complaints regarding violence from within the community. As for human rights defenders, women human rights defenders who work on LGBT rights, the threat of violence is particularly severe, irrespective of whether or not they're members of the community themselves. This is because there are very few safe spaces to talk about LGBT issues. We still, like much of the post-colonial world, live with this famous or infamous Section 377 of our penal code, which effectively criminalizes same-sex relationships. The murders of two prominent LGBT rights activists in 2016 shook the movement to its core. I should say it's an emerging movement in Bangladesh in the last 10 years, but has been very severely pushed back by this incident in 2016. And the response of state authorities after that, who have, of course, acknowledged that they're continuing the investigations, but at the same time have issued public condemnations of same-sex relationships and asserted both nationally and internationally that such relationships are, quote-unquote, against Bangladeshi culture, has again been a situation which has really created a further, I think, fear and anxiety in the community that it can't express itself, it can't come forward, it can't claim its rights under the law because the law itself is criminalizing. Now, I just want to talk very quickly about our own organizational issues. BLAST is a leading organization campaigning for compliance with the Supreme Court judgment mandating the establishment of investigatory mechanisms on sexual harassment by all public and private bodies. We frequently train organizations around the country, and yet we faced a situation where women colleagues, all trained or practicing lawyers and working at our head office, faced serial sexual harassment from a young male colleague, also a lawyer. All of the women, unfortunately, remained silent about their experiences for weeks on end. Ultimately, we found out they were afraid that if they spoke out, they would be stigmatized because most of them were single women, unmarried or divorced. This incident illustrated well for us how women human rights defenders are impacted upon by prevailing social norms and attitudes, including moral judgments based on sexuality and the enormous emphasis on marriage as a mark of respectability and worth. It also illustrated in the end how mobilizing by women and by men in their support can result in change. In this case, the silence that had continued for so many weeks broke after one of the young women involved finally spoke to an older woman colleague, who incidentally sits on our own Sexual Harassment Complaints Committee. The older colleague then reported the matter to Human Resources and then to a male board member, a well-known leader of the bar nationally. We were able to take steps finally, an investigation, action against the offending lawyer, and then we took further systematic action. We printed posters and materials, information communication materials, overhauled our internal audit policies, provided training to staff, and started reporting to our board on compliance. And we're now advocating with bar associations around the country, as well as the Bar Council, to adopt these Supreme Court guidelines so that we can see more systemic change happening.
Ms. Hussain, if you could wrap up fairly quickly because your time is finished. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about what further initiatives we need to take. I think it's clear we need standards and structures. It's not enough to have policies, but we need to make those actually work. We need to monitor and track the policies that we need to put in place. And I think it's really important to say that we need to highlight the importance of civility and respect, to acknowledge the importance of respect for each other. And just finally, 25 years ago, I had the opportunity to be at the Vienna Conference on Human Rights, where we talked about women's rights and human rights. At this point, given the state of the world and given our own national context, I think it's very important for us as women human rights defenders to talk about the universality of rights and to speak about rights for all, about freedom of expression, as well as freedom of association and the right to life and liberty. And this means questioning laws and systems that actually restrict our rights. I can speak about this more perhaps in the question and answer session, but I think restrictions on, let me just do that. But restrictions on, for example, speech, digital security, restrictions on NGOs operating, those are the kinds of restrictions that women human rights defenders as men are also facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hopefully you'll be able to elaborate on some of those during the questions and answers. We also have here with us today Asiya Nasir. It's very nice to have you here, especially as a fellow parliamentarian, and I'd like to invite you to speak for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, for providing me this opportunity to come and record my statement over here regarding my past experiences as a parliamentarian for the last 16 years. I'm Asya Nasir, married with 3 children, and I come from the province of Balochistan, that is the southwest part of Pakistan. My political affiliation has been with a religious Islamic party, that is Jamiat Ulama Islam, and perhaps I was the first Christian ever to join this Islamic party, as the Islamic religious parties are thought to be no-go area for the minorities or the faith-based population living in Pakistan. I started my career as an educationist, but coming from the political background, I was urged and motivated to join politics, and in 2002 got first time elected to the Parliament of National Assembly of Pakistan, and then I completed my 3 consecutive terms as a parliamentarian there, voicing for the rights of my people. So I have a strong belief that God has placed me there for some special reason, and the party which I chose, and often for which I have been criticized not only by my people but by other liberal and secular people, that why are Christian women going to join a religious Islamic party, and still I'm affiliated to that political party. So my objective was to mainstream the minorities living in Pakistan, because if you go and see the background of the Pakistan, that the minorities living in Pakistan, they has contributed largely in the building up of Pakistan, in the creation of Pakistan, in educating the masses in Pakistan, and in the health sector. But slowly and gradually, that status has been declining, because our ancestors, they consented to be a part of Pakistan, believing that we're going to have a life of respect and honor in Pakistan. But their dreams were not fulfilled. And my vision was to voice for the voiceless people and to help them to voice for their rights in living in an Islamic state. So my objectives were to mainstream minorities in Pakistan by working for constitutional rights, for their social, economic, educational, and political uplift, to eliminate all existing discriminations from society, to work for the suppressed communities with the local organizations for their social, political, economic uplift, and addressing all issues relating to mainstreaming for inclusive democracy, because I strongly believe that no nation or no country can progress until and unless it guarantees and it ensures politically, socially, economically, and educationally freedom of religion to all, and life of equality and equity to all citizens. So keeping this in my mind, these were my goals which I set, and guidance and to set goals for the young population of the country. So before I come to the challenges, because I think that I want to leave more to the question session regarding the talking all the time. I just want to come to the challenges, what challenges I have been facing throughout my journey and struggle during these 16 or 17 years. It has not been an easy path for me to work with the religious party, because I started as an unexperienced politician with an Islamic religious party, and the situation for me was also of uncertainty. But here I just want to give the appreciation and credit to my political party, that apart from being a mainstream right-wing religious party in the country, they always supported me and they encouraged me, and they provided me the platform to voice for my people, because I have been a very vocal and very vibrant speaker in the parliament. Each time I spoke out for the rights of my people, I had the fear that this time I'll be removed from my party, but it never happened. And on the contradictory, my party always stood by my side and they supported me, and whenever I spoke out, they said that the statement which she has given is our party policy. So I think that it was a great relief for the minorities living in Pakistan, that a religious party supporting them, which was thought to be a no-go area for the minorities. In 2012, one of the top leading newspapers ranked me about the 100 most powerful women in Pakistan, women who shaped Pakistan and who are shaping fate of Pakistani women. It was after I gave a speech after the murder of Minister Shahbaz Bhatti, and I think that the speech is being given to all of the honorable members for your kind pursuit. In this speech, I effectively spoke and addressed the struggles that minorities faced in a majority Islamic state. And my people know me very well for my bold speeches in the parliaments, but it has not only the speeches or I have been speaking or standing out for my people. It is also because I have been participating very actively in the legislative business in the parliament. So 14 bills, particularly for the religious minorities, has been a record for a minority member to move into the parliament. And some of these bills, you can go through my CV, that is the Women Protection Bill 2010, Domestic Violence Bill 2008, Anti-Women Practices Bill, increase of seats for the minorities in the provincial and at the national level, amendments in harassment against women at workplace bill, hate crimes bill. I want to focus on this bill. Hate crimes bill was a very important bill which I moved in the parliament because we have observed and we have experienced that at the many times the majority people or there's extremist handful of extremist mindset people who are very biased and discriminated against the minorities, and at any time they can go and burn out the residence or the assets of the minority people. So it is not criminalized in our bill, so in our constitution. So I just want to bring it that it should be criminalized, that hate crimes, that on the basis of religion nobody should be discriminated or biased. And besides this, amendments in cybercrime bill, terrorist act, two of my amendments were incorporated by the government as a part of the bill in the cybercrime bill of the government. Then child rights protection, minorities access to higher education, and national policy for interfaith harmony bill 2018. This policy, I would like to refer that when I come back to the challenges, that it is very important to have collaborations and networks, and one of the networking group, that is International Panel of Parliamentarians, Honorable David Anderson, who is chairing this group, is sitting here, as I am one of the founding members of this International Panel of Parliamentarians for the freedom of religion or belief or with no belief since 2014. And I think that this network group has been very instrumental and has been very helpful and supporting and voicing for the rights of the minorities living all over the world, no matter to which faith they belong to. And this forum also motivated me to bring forth this national policy for the interfaith harmony in the parliament, which was adopted by the cabinet. And it was the first time ever that a national policy for interfaith harmony was drafted and adopted by the cabinet of Pakistan. So I think that it was great achievement on the part of this networking group. Not only networking group, but I was also one of the pioneers of establishing all parties group of parliamentarians for the freedom of religion in the Parliament of Pakistan. There were more than 60 members who were part of this caucus and who supported freedom of religion and interfaith harmony in Pakistan. So I just want to come to the challenges first. That the situation of human rights in Pakistan is not very good, and it is even worse for women human rights defenders. They face challenges across the board and have to fight the status quo on all fronts, their families, the communities they work in, and even fellow human rights defenders. So one of the challenges for me was non-acceptance, because when I joined politics, it was an environment where it was very hard for men to accept women leaders, and they always objected that why should they appease a women political leader, or why should they follow a women leader. And another thing that this discrimination I felt was at the hands of my fellow human rights defenders and my fellow several women who are working for the human rights. I was always objected to be a part of the religious party. This discriminated me, they biased me, and I was always often objected for covering my head, thinking that this is a Muslim dress, and a Christian women should not dress up like this, and things like this. So I think that the path which I chose was more challenging, more difficult, remaining myself in a religious party, working and trying to change the mindset of the people, because often we speak that we need to mainstream the minorities, that this is how we can mainstream the parties, that it was very important for the minorities living in the party to join the religious parties, because the religious parties in Pakistan are very influential and they have great impact on a large population of Pakistan. So security issues, definitely we have, since last 2 decades, Pakistan is facing a lot of problems, including security, discriminations are there, economic marginalization is there, the governmental policies, many times they hit the people there. But in the end, I must say that I'm not the only woman who is striving hard or struggling for the rights of my people. There are other women along with me, and I would like you all to see a small video clip for 1 or 2 minutes, so that which will demonstrate the struggle of the women, including myself, in Pakistan. And I must say that in the end, I just want to end up with one sentence, that today sitting before you is the true face of a Pakistani woman, strong, courageous, committed, untiring, aware of her rights, abiding by her cultural and religious values, paving path through the challenges, determined to bring prosperity and better future for the coming generations. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. And I'm seeing consent to go over time to be able to see the 2-minute video. So we'll do that right now. And that means we'll probably just have one round for questions, if that's okay. If we're having difficulty with the video, might I suggest then that we'll start with the questions, and then we could see the video at the end of the questions, if we can get it up by that time. Yeah. Okay, so we'll start with questions. So we will begin with a round. We'll just do one round of questions. We'll begin with Mr. Anderson for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank both of our witnesses for being with us today. Madam Nazir, I just wanted to point out the statement that you made in March of 2011, 3 years before we met, after the death of Shahbaz Badi. It's worth the read if people would take the time to take a look at that. It's a statement of courage, I would say, particularly after both Governor Tazir and Shahbaz Badi had paid with their lives for making some of those similar statements. I wanted to ask you 2 questions, so I'll ask you to be short on your answer on the first one. The courts in Pakistan, I'm just wondering, are they of use to women human rights defenders, or do they stand in the way? We seem to get mixed messages from the news coverage that we hear. I know there's a couple of groups, TWO and the Women in Struggle for Empowerment, have both gone back to court and been able to get their certifications back from the courts. But I'm just wondering, what role do the courts play in your struggle for justice for women and for Pakistanis?
Thank you very much, MP Anderson. I think that the courts of Pakistan, they are working autonomously and independently, and we have strong trust on our courts and our judicial system. And recently, by their 2 or 3 decisions, especially the decision regarding Asia Bibi, they have proved that our judicial system is really working in the very positive and in the right manner. And yes, you are very right that the courts, they are sorting out these cases, and they are looking into the cases regarding the human rights defenders, especially the women human rights defenders, and the courts are taking suo motu actions. Recently, the Chief Justice and our former Chief Justice, he was very active and he was very concerned regarding the issues pertaining to human rights in Pakistan.
Okay, thank you. And I'll maybe ask this question of both of you. The particulars may be different, but you've raised the issue of protecting women and children. Sometimes they are the same people. Recently in Pakistan, there were 45 Hindu girls who were kidnapped. They were converted and then married off. I know there was another mother of 3 who had been married for 16 years who was kidnapped through forced conversion and then married off. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the state of the forced marriages and forced conversions. What happens to these young women after as well as during the situation that they find themselves in?
The issue of forced marriages and forced conversion has been a very, you can say that, burning issue in Pakistan, not today, but since many years, because we have seen and observed that the young Hindu girls or the young Christian girls, they are kidnapped and forcefully converted from their religion and forcefully married to some man of the majority religion. So it has been a big issue for us, and there was a time that when some legislators tried to bring forth some amendments to amend this law of converting to some other religion, and especially to the religion of Islam. But then there was again a controversial statement and protest by the other side of the majority people, saying that they cannot bind the conversion of the religion to age. We were demanding that there should be some age, there should be some particular age, and especially means it should be 18 years. But less than 18 years, how a minor who does not understand her religion, how can she be converted to some other religion and understands the other religion? And secondly, our reservation has always been that why it's only the minority women, why not the men? Why the men are not interested to get converted to other religion? Why only our girls and women, they are abducted, they are forcefully converted and forcefully married to the Muslim men?
Then what happens if you go to the court? The courts rule it. What rulings do they make? They should be returned to their communities. What are the options available once this has taken place?
Yes, at this particular issue, I must say that here we don't understand what the courts are doing, because there was one incident when a minor of 14-year Christian, she was converted to Islam and she was married to a Muslim boy, and the court let her go with her husband, while the parents and the family, they were arguing that she is a minor. How can she be allowed to go to convert and to go with her husband? So here I think that many times it happens that the court takes the law that once she is converted, once she goes before the magistrate and she records her statement that she has converted by her consent, she can go and live with her husband, leaving her family. So here we are protesting that now this is a wrong law, and we don't accept this, because a minor cannot be converted, and women and then they are not allowed to meet their families and their parents or their husbands even.
Ms. Hussain, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I think it's a rather different situation in Bangladesh. We don't really have the same kind of situation in relation to conversions or forced conversions en masse. And I think in relation to child early and forced marriage, that is a very serious problem in Bangladesh. But we have recent legislation, the Child Marriage Restraint Act, which provides a number of preventive measures, including setting up district committees to combat the practice, but also provides protective measures. So it specifies, for example, that marriage registrars have to check birth registration or ID documents before they actually register a marriage. Now, there is a problem with that legislation, which I think is very much due to an accommodation by the state with actually, unfortunately, religious groups and fundamentalist groups. And there's an exception in the law which says that in certain cases, a marriage won't be treated as a child marriage, even when it involves underage parties, a girl under 18 or a boy under 21, if the parents agree that it should be treated in that way and if the court orders that. And the arguments for why that exception was brought in were presumably implicitly that under religious or personal law, under Muslim personal law in particular, a girl can marry once she's reached puberty. And it seems that it's to cover that situation. And there's a similar situation to what the previous speaker was saying, that there are situations where there are inter-community marriages, where a girl aged 16 or 17, an adolescent, chooses to marry somebody, exercising her own consent from a different community, and her parents then come in to try and stop that marriage and stop that relationship. And in those situations, actually, I think there is an issue of a conflict of rights, because the girl is trying to exercise her right to marry who she chooses. The parents are coming in and invoking the criminal law and making false claims often about forced conversion and also about, rape or trafficking or other allegations to try and prevent that girl's exercise of consent taking place. So I think it's a more complicated scenario, and it's also an issue of conflict of rights.
15 seconds.
Oh, just then, I've got very little time left. You had mentioned, Ms. Hussain, about the need for civility, respect as we work towards the universality of rights. And I'm just wondering, got any suggestions for us how we can create a situation like that? We seem to have that same challenge around the globe.
Yeah, I think it's global. It's definitely a global challenge, and that's why we're grateful that you're speaking to these issues, as we're not being able to do them ourselves domestically. But I think that we have to focus on that. We have to focus on tolerance. I think, and particularly I think as women human rights defenders, it's very problematic that in some ways that we are faster to take offense than anybody else. And I think that we should really assert, obviously with massive exceptions in terms of hate speech, we should really be trying to move towards greater freedom of expression, not less. And exactly in this world we have today, which seems to be about restriction and constriction and repression and intolerance, it's really incumbent upon us to fight for these bigger spaces and wider spaces.
Thank you very much for that. We will now move to Mr. Sims for 7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay. Thank you, Chair. Now, my questions will be towards one individual, and then the other. But if you want to weigh in, please just raise your hands as such. And if you want to talk or answer to the same question, okay. So, Ms. Hussain, I want to go to your testimony first. You talked about women seeking help in urban areas and how difficult that can be. What are the main places within an urban area by which women feel comfortable enough to approach certain community or groups to seek help?
Well, I think I should explain that in the Bangladesh context, we have had many development initiatives, and we have a government-run multi-sectoral program on addressing violence against women that has victim support centers from the police, one-stop crisis centers in our medical hospitals, and very close partnerships between the government and NGOs working together. So we do have an excellent program in place. It's not enough. It's not in all districts, but it's an excellent model. Having said that,
yeah, if I may, just very quickly. So there are NGOs and there are the government. Are there one of those that people will go to before the other? I'm just trying to pinpoint here where the places of help are.
No, your point is spot on. I think the whole problem is that there isn't enough of anything. And in terms of the urban scenario, I mean, Bangladesh is rapidly urbanizing. Dhaka capital is one of the fastest growing cities in the world. And the issue is that many people still live in informal settlements, particularly low income groups. And there is really no connectivity between where they live and where the services are. So that's one of the things that actually civil society organizations are trying to do, is bridge that gap, is sort of be the groups that can either through outreach or now increasingly through technology, try and connect these groups into existing services, whether it's health clinics or whether it's legal services, whether it's legal aid organizations and so on, or legal aid services of the government.
Has technology improved the ability to communicate with those in need?
I think it has very significantly. I mean, we have very extensive mobile phone penetration in Bangladesh, and we're using now mobile technology to provide advice and information, particularly, for example, to workers around their rights in the workplace. And we're now developing new apps on how to do that around for our core clients around rights in the family, issues around domestic violence, for example, child marriage, and also sexual violence.
Ms. Hussain, if I could just ask the same question, except this time the context is in rural areas outside of the cities.
I mean, I think the issue of distance is much greater in terms of getting into actual places where there's service provision. But in rural areas, as I said, we have many development organizations working. One of the world's largest development organization, BRAC, with whom we work also, is right across the country. So in many ways, we have frontline workers available in rural areas, even though people living in rural areas may not be able to come to the formal institutions of justice, such as the courts and police stations. There are many informal processes that are available. So, for example, mediation run by NGOs is also available for dispute resolution, not for, of course, serious crimes, as we've been discussing.
And how can a country like Canada help these the successful stories that come from either urban or rural about connecting and allowing people to come to you with a great deal of comfort?
I think there are many lessons from Canada in terms of how women-friendly services have been run. There are also many lessons, not only in terms of practice, but particularly in terms of jurisprudence. I mean, I think the Canadian Supreme Court has set down a number of landmark decisions which have really been instrumental in terms of how we've overhauled how we see and how we understand rights. And so I think that actually working with our judiciary, working with some of the formal institutions, but also working on how women have been empowered to seek and claim rights would be some of the ways that you could really work effectively with Bangladeshi counterparts.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nasir, my questions to you regarding, well, there are many. You feel free to weigh in what was just mentioned if you wish, but I'm interested also as a parliamentarian for 14 years? 15?
16 years.
16 years, my apologies. I'm closing in on 16 myself. So I want to ask you about the system of, does your system, has it changed on a national level, or regional level for that matter? Has it changed such that there are more minorities represented in your parliament? Were there functional changes in your governance?
Yes, over the years we have seen that there are quite a number of changes in the past government. The past governments, they have taken a lot of initiatives to mainstream the minorities. We have been provided representation at the upper house Senate, because there was no representation at the House of Senate for the minorities.
Is there a seat for you then? Is that the case? How does that work?
There are 4 seats reserved for the minorities from each province, because at the Senate we have equal representation from all the provinces. So there is 1 seat reserved for the faith-based minorities from each province, and besides that we have 10 seats reserved for the minorities at the National Assembly of Pakistan. But besides that 10 reserved seats, a minority can contest any general seat from any constituency of Pakistan.
Sure, but you still get the amount of representation within the House based on just the minority, not geography.
No, just a minority, not geographically, because still not, I think that democracy has not that flourished and that not developed in Pakistan, that majority goes to vote for minorities. But still there are some precedences, because recently a Hindu member has been elected on general seat from Pakistan People's Party from the province of Sindh.
And to you, that's a promising sign? And to you, that's a promising sign of things are changing?
I think it is, because if political parties, they review their manifestos and they support the minorities at general elections, definitely minorities can gain seats on the general elections.
Do you think that this type of change represents change to all society as well? Like if I'm a person who is in a terrible situation, no matter where it is in Pakistan, that I feel free to approach the government if I have a particular problem? Like, let's say, is a problem of forced marriage?
Yes, people are, there are changes. The government is taking a lot of initiatives, and recently regarding forced conversions, the forced conversions which have taken places, the government is very much concerned, because there's a lot of pressure exerted, not from inside but outside the country also. So the government is looking into it seriously, and there's a Ministry for Human Rights that is taking up this matter, and they are, recently I heard that they are deciding to bring forth some legislation to prevent these forced marriages happening in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, if that's your time. We'll go to Ms. Hardcastle for the final round of questions. 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll ask my question of both of you, and then perhaps we'll start with you then, Ms. Nasir, because you're here, probably about 3 minutes, and then the other 3 minutes to you, Ms. Hossain. So I would like to ask you about the politicization of the judiciary. So the court cases and the court decisions that are made, and then other things that are happening politically, like supporting or closing down organizations that advance women's human rights. Is there a connection there? And what can Canada's role be in helping to advance that, if we're using the United Nations High Commission, or should we be directly supporting bilateral relationships that do that support at a more regional or local level? And should we be concentrating politically, or is the judiciary also an issue that needs to be looked at?
Judiciary is politicized at this moment in Pakistan, or they have anything to do with the human rights organizations and all. I think it's more regarding the governmental policies, because recently the governmental policies has not been very friendly towards the organizations working in the human rights sector, because we have seen a number of organizations have been asked to leave Pakistan, which raising a lot of questions and queries among the people and the civil society of Pakistan, because we think that we need a lot of work to be done in the human rights sector. Still, the situation of human rights in Pakistan is not that acceptable. So we need that at the part of the Canadian government, and the Canadian High Commission in Pakistan needs to work more on the political side with the political representations to review the governmental policies regarding the INGOs on working in the human rights sector, because we have seen recently that all those organizations and people who are voicing for the human rights, they have been silenced and they have been asked to leave Pakistan, which is not a very good sign for a government or for a country.
Ms. Hussain?
Yes, well, thank you very much for raising that point. Again, I think that the issue of really closing space in our context is really critical for all human rights defenders of all genders. The issue of the judiciary is quite difficult for me to answer because we have rather stringent contempt laws. But bearing that in mind, I would say that we still do get a measure of justice. Obviously, we work primarily on providing legal services. But I think that in certain so-called sensitive cases where there are powerful parties involved or there are political interests involved, it's increasingly enormously challenging to ensure any kind of remedy. And I think if you look at the kinds of interpretations of recent legislation, for example, I mentioned earlier the Digital Security Act, which has recently come into place. In addition to providing some protections and also providing, for example, for data protection, it has incredibly problematic provisions which allow a frontline police officer to arrest someone without warrant simply for hurting religious sentiment or defamation or hurting the image of the nation, particularly problematic provision, under which we recently saw a woman football coach, one of our only members on FIFA, being imprisoned for 3 days. Based on a third-party complaint alleging that she had made a comment about a high official. We also see laws such as those which restrict the receipt of foreign donations by non-governmental organizations. And that particular law says that any derogatory comment about the Constitution or any constitutional body, including Parliament, can lead to very severe reprisals against the organization. So you were saying what could Canada do and how could it best respond? I mean, Canada has been a great friend to Bangladesh in the last 2 years on the issue of the Rohingya crisis. But I think we would really welcome your engagement with us on the situation of Bangladeshis in Bangladesh itself and on actually the concerns we have around democratic and civil space. I mean, I wish I could be making this comment to my parliament, but we haven't unfortunately had this kind of hearing being suggested. We've had hearings around this legislation that I just mentioned, but sadly not many of the recommendations made by civil society were paid much attention to. And I think these are exactly the kinds of things that can be done. We talked earlier about the importance of civility, tolerance and respect, much in need all over the world. But again, in our context, I think dialogue across our countries, focusing on the kinds of practices that can be put in place, not demonizing people who speak up for rights, not automatically identifying someone who speaks up for rights as being anti-national or somehow against independence or against history. I think that's very important. Understanding that we all are very proud of our own country and we want to make change and development happen, but we want to do it with freedom of expression intact, being able to disagree with each other about the way we move forward towards joint goals. I think that Canada could be part of that dialogue, could help to strengthen that dialogue, and could do that through engaging in strengthening existing institutions. One of our greatest fears, I think, as women and male human rights defenders, is that we don't have, that our institutions really are under threat in every respect, whether it's Parliament, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's other constitutional bodies or statutory bodies. And that's really where we need to focus, because we need to create greater space both for speech and for action and for association.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both of you for your very insightful testimony and the courage of the work that you do. We only have 3 minutes left, which is just the right amount of time to now view the video that Ms. Nasir has provided for us. So go ahead.
I have experienced that a lot of challenges they came into my way, but the undaunted courage which I had and the deprivation of my people kept the women, especially the faith-based minority women, faced double jeopardy. One of the biggest challenge for me was that I was associated with a religious but political party, but unexpectedly that religious party was very encouraging, and they gave me the platform and confidence to speak out for my people. But in spite of my challenges, there were people who really supported me. After hard work, I really made it prove that a woman can lead the nation.
Thank you very much. And with that hopeful note, we can adjourn this particular session of our committee. Thank you, both of you, for being here. Okay.